Welcome to the Architect's Ledger. Today we open the first chapter of Paul's letter to the Romans, a passage that functions as a divine courtroom. In Romans 1:18 through 32, Paul builds a universal indictment against humanity, not to condemn us, but to show us the desperate need for what grace alone can provide. This is the foundation upon which the entire gospel rests. Paul's argument is deliberate and architectural. Before he can proclaim salvation, he must first establish that every human being stands guilty before God. This session is titled The Universal Indictment. Before God can offer grace, he must first establish the case. Paul begins not with good news, but with a verdict, and that verdict is this: all of humanity is without excuse. The prosecution opens with its first charge, suppressing the truth. Romans 1:18 declares that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness. The word translated as hold is the Greek kateko, meaning to suppress, to restrain, to hold down. Humanity does not simply lack the truth. Humanity actively suppresses it. God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen since creation. Yet, rather than honor him, mankind descended into a catastrophic spiral. Paul traces it in 4 stages. First, revelation. God made himself known. Second, rejection. Mankind refused to honor him. Third, delusion. Their thinking became futile. Fourth, substitution. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images of created things. The consequence of idolatry is not simply moral failure. It is divine withdrawal. 3 times in this passage, Paul uses the phrase, God gave them over. When humanity persistently chooses the creature over the Creator, God honors that choice by removing his restraining hand. The result is a cascade of moral and relational breakdown, not as arbitrary punishment, but as the natural fruit of a creation cut off from its source. Before we go further, Paul invites us to re-examine what we mean by sin. The traditional view defines sin as bad actions, moral violations, rule breaking. But the scriptural reality runs deeper. The Greek word hamartia, translated as sin, literally means to miss the mark, to fall short, to lack, to be deficient. Sin is not primarily about behavior. It is about a fundamental deficiency in the nature of humanity, a failure to reach the standard of God's glory. And with this understanding, we must also reconsider what we mean by death. The false premise says spiritual death means eternal separation from God in a place of conscious torment. But the scriptural reality points elsewhere. Death, in both Hebrew and Greek thought, is a return, a going back to the dust from which we came. Romans 5:12 tells us, death spread to all men, not as a legal penalty arbitrarily imposed, but as the natural consequence of a fallen existence. This brings us to Adam. In Romans 5:12, Paul writes, through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin. And thus death spread to all men because all sinned. Adam's transgression did not merely set a bad example, it introduced a condition. All of humanity became participants in a nature bent away from God. The inheritance of Adam is not guilt for his specific act, but a shared human condition, a nature inclined towards self, towards substitution, toward the creature rather than the Creator. The divine courtroom has now heard the evidence. The verdict is rendered. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. No flesh will be justified by the works of the law. The entire world, Jew and Gentile alike, stands accountable. The courtroom falls silent. The sentence is just. And yet, the story is not over, because the same God who issues the verdict is also the one who provides the defence. Enter the 10th slide, gratuitous justification. Romans 3:24 declares that we are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. The word freely here is the Greek dorian, without cause, without payment, gratis. God does not justify us because of anything we have done or could do. He justifies us as a gift, an act of pure, sovereign grace extended to a humanity that had no means to pay its own debt. And the means of that justification is the faith of Jesus Christ. Not merely faith in Christ, but the faithfulness of Christ himself. Paul draws a distinction that translation often obscures. It is not our act of believing that saves us. It is Christ's own perfect obedience, his unwavering trust in the Father, his faithfulness unto death that becomes the ground of our righteousness before God. Paul seals this argument with a breathtaking symmetry in Romans 5:18 and 19. As through one man's offense, judgment came to all men, resulting in condemnation. Even so, through one man's righteous act, the free gift came to all men, resulting in justification of life. Adam brought a verdict of condemnation to all. Christ brought a verdict of justification to all. The scales are not merely balanced, they are overturned by grace. Why did God allow the indictment at all? Why the long courtroom drama? Romans 11 gives us the answer. God has consigned all to disobedience, so that he may have mercy on all. The indictment was never the end of the story. It was the necessary prologue to mercy. God permitted the universal condition of human failure so that grace might be universal in its scope and undeniable in its glory. And the final scope of that reconciliation is breathtaking. It is not limited to individual souls. It encompasses all of creation. 3 great movements mark God's redemptive purpose. First, creation. All things made through Christ. Second, justification. All humanity declared righteous in him. Third, conciliation. All things reconciled back to God through the blood of his cross. The architect designed not a rescue of a remnant, but a restoration of all. We close where we began, in Romans 1:18. But now we see it in full light. The wrath revealed against sin is not the final word. Romans 5:20 and 21 declare, where sin abounded, grace abounded much more. The indictment was real, the guilt was universal, but grace, superabounding grace, is more. The architect's ledger is not a record of debt without remedy. It is a ledger in which every account has been settled, every deficit covered, by the inexhaustible grace of God in Christ Jesus.